All right. Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm Marieke. If I haven't met you yet, I'm the Executive Director of the Cambridge Historical Society, and this is our event. You're at the library, just making sure everyone's on the correct flight, and no one thought that they were in another space. I want to thank you and welcome you to our final conversation of our Housing for All series. How many people here in the audience are Cambridge Historical Society members? Hooray, thank you. So great news. If you didn't raise your hand, you can join up today. In the back, Rosemary or Lynn will be happy to help you. We're a great group, and your support puts on programs like this. We are a private nonprofit, and we receive no city, state, or federal funding for our operations, so it is vital to have your support, and we thank you for it. We rely on the generosity of Canterbridgians like you. We have some board members in the audience, and they are here to answer any questions. So if my board members could please raise their hands or stand up or give a little, yeah, there they are. Feel free to stump them with your questions or praise or thanks. So in addition to the generous support of our members, I would like to thank the sponsors for our series. Alexandria Real Estate Equities, Bullfinch Properties, Capital One Cafe. Those folks are actually here. Jackie, are you here? You raise your hand. They're in the back. They brought the coffee, so they're very nice. HYM Investment Group, Eastern Bank, Harvard Square Business Association, Graffito SP, Leader Bank, North Cambridge Cooperative Bank, and Whole Foods. We give them just a round of applause. Thank you for their generous sponsorship of this whole series. We could not have done it without them. Extra special thanks to Cambridge Savings Bank and the Mass Foundation for the Humanities. Thank you. Also, a very special thanks to the Cambridge Public Library, who gave us this beautiful space with its tricky microphone setup, but we love them anyway, don't we? How many people here have attended one of our other conversations? So, wow, this is great. You guys came back. Thank you. So, how many of you, now that you're here, will have attended all three? Wow, that's great. Thank you. That's very kind of you. So at our first event, our moderator, Representative Marjorie Decker, said, "It's a privilege and a balm to have thoughtful community conversation." As our city and our country reacts to last week's election, I want you to know that your local historical society cares about you. We exist for you. We're here for your ancestors and your descendants. We're here for you if you live in Cambridge or if you don't. If you're here for a semester or a lifetime. This history is your history. I don't know if you have, but I've heard some reports of harassment and intimidation here in Cambridge in the past week, and it breaks my heart. I want you to know two things. One, know that the Cambridge Historical Society is an organization that welcomes all people to its events and programs. Whether we are here at the library or at our headquarters at the Hooper Lee Nichols House on Brattle Street, we are a safe place for thoughtful, respectful dialogue. You are welcome here. Two, know that the Society remains committed to our work of highlighting the importance of history in our lives today. Now more than ever, we need to review what our city, our society has done. There is great uncertainty in our future, but great wisdom in our past. We promise to help you find it. So why is the Cambridge Historical Society holding an event on affordable housing? We are not interested in hosting a current issues forum. Instead, our goal is to slow down issues that our city faces today and use history to examine them. We are asking each other, how did we get here? What happened and why? What's my role, my responsibility in solving this problem? That's our job, the job of our historical society. We use stories, your personal experiences, your history, to make sense of the world today. Here are three ways we're doing that. One, by using the humanities. We are approaching these issues that's on the minds of everyone in Cambridge through a humanities lens, specifically a historical one. This is different from how other groups approach these topics. Where they use data, we use stories. By taking perspective. Through our expert panelists, we are providing you with background so you have more information to inform your conclusions. We hope that this background augments what you already know. We hope some information will surprise you and you'll want to share it with others in your life. 3, by creating empathy. History is not just the pursuit of armchair history buffs or memorizing battle dates. It is not static facts. It is the web of stories that define us as human beings. It is the remembering and reflecting on the events of the past so we become more empathetic, caring people. So we are humbled. So we are better citizens. So together we make a better city, a better world. That's the work of historians, amateur or professional, and that's what we are hoping to do tonight. I want to review the ground rules for tonight. They can also be found in your conversation guide. Be an active listener. Pause and repeat back in your head what you heard before speaking or raising your hand. Don't just hear, absorb all you observed. Ask questions based on genuine curiosity. Think and speak with empathy. Be a historian. That is, understand the life circumstances swirling around a person is what led them to a decision. Think about these conditions before passing judgment. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm hoping everyone can maybe silence their phones just to make sure we have that happening. Our speakers will be giving short presentations followed by Q&A. When we do Q&A, you'll have an opportunity to come up here and say your question to Helly, and make sure it's a question, please, for the speakers. What we discussed tonight will not be forgotten. We are being recorded by our friends at CCTV. It's going to air in a couple weeks. The previous 2 symposiums have already aired, and you can find that information on the first one aired, and you can find that information on our website. And also, if we have your email, we'll be emailing you and letting you know when you can catch those and pass those on to your friends. We're also taking notes on all of our events for the whole course of the year. You can actually see some of the answers to questions from previous events up on the wall. They're really enjoyable. I hope you get a chance to look at them. It's really important to us as a collecting institution to have these memories, these thoughts, your opinions written down and saved for our archives. So in 50 years, 2 years, 100 years, your thoughts and feelings about these issues will be recorded in our archives. If anyone's on Twitter, you can follow us at CambridgeHS with the hashtag HousingForAll. Please do. The speakers from all of our conversations are sending us suggestions for further reading. There's information on our guidebook about that. You'll find it on our website, and we even have some in the back if you want to take those home. As always, if you're interested in learning more about this topic, I urge you to review primary source material. We are blessed with 3 repositories here in Cambridge where historical materials on housing are lovingly cared for. One is ours at the Historical Society. We're lucky tonight because our archivist, Rena Sandler, is over here. You can ask her any question you want. We're also in a library. You can ask questions all the time, but Rena can answer any questions about our collections. If you want to do research on something here in Cambridge, she is your gal, go get her. There's also the Cambridge Historical Commission, as well as the library, the main branch. All places welcome you with open arms to learn more about the history of housing in our city through historical documents, which are the best documents. This is the last event in our series, and thank you for joining us for all 3. If you feel like you want to talk more about this issue, perhaps over a beer, we will be doing that immediately following this presentation. Myself and some of our speakers will be over at the field. And everyone know where that is. It's on Prospect Street. We'll be in the back. You'll see us. Maybe I'll wear my name tag, but we hope to see you there. Finally, there's a survey included in your guide, and it's on your seat. It's yellow. Please fill that out. I can't stress enough how important it is to have your opinions on what we do and how we can be better, what you liked, what you didn't like. Please fill that out. We'll also be sending you an email after the fact, also with a link to a survey. I'm so pleased and honored to share the stage tonight with for this very important discussion with these wonderful speakers. I will not say any more. You've heard enough from me, but I'm pleased to turn it over to the Society's Doing History Curator, Diana Lempel.
Hey everyone. Can you hear me? Hi. Sure, that would be great. Just a little bit lower. I think maybe just that is good. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. All right. I want to start by asking everyone to close your eyes. There is a strong feedback loop between your sense of your body and how it's doing and your ability to manage your thinking and emotions. Take a moment. Close your eyes and give yourself the time to take a deep breath. You're here in this room. We are all here together right now for this meaningful conversation. When you feel like you are here, really here in this room, you can open your eyes back up. I've needed moments like that a lot lately. This year, in our programming at the Historical Society, we've been talking about home. We've been talking about home, and we've been talking about housing, and we've been talking about houses from a bunch of different angles. We've been talking about building and building codes and small houses, tiny houses, and old houses, and poor houses. We've been talking about innovation and solutions to challenges with housing and equitable housing and affordable housing and the right to housing. We've debated innovative solutions, and we've looked back into the past, and we have talked a lot about our fears and our worries and our concerns about whether Cambridge is even home anymore, what it means to be Cambridge, what it means to have a house, to make a home, what it means to do that in community. We have had conversations about why no one shovels snow for each other anymore after a blizzard, and whether that's even really true. We've had questions about, well, you can see a lot of the conversations that we've been having at the back of the room. At our history cafes throughout the year. How many of you attended history cafes? They're fun. They're conversations with an expert or two in a bar in Cambridge, where we chat, we ask questions, and then we do this really fun version of Q&A, which is not unlike what we'll do tonight, where we ask 3 questions and we have people in the audience write responses to those questions, and then we pass them to the speaker, and kind of like apples to apples, the speaker takes a look at them and chooses the one that he or she thinks is most resonant with what they're thinking about and reads it aloud. So there's some competition, which makes it fun. There's some beer, which makes it fun, but beer's not the only thing that makes things fun, really. It's that we're all kind of there, getting past small talk and really wrestling with what we think is interesting and important. And so at the back of the room, you'll see some of the conversations that we have been having throughout the year. And one of the things that comes up a lot in conversations about housing and urban planning generally is the question about when you think about what a place is, are you thinking about the buildings in that place? Or are you thinking about the people in that place? And that sounds super reductive, and it is. But oftentimes when we think about making policy and making decisions about the city, this binary, places and people, buildings and people, comes up again and again. And in our first conversation, that was one of the things that was really thrown into high relief. Speaker Corinne Espinosa said to us, she said, if the people who live in Cambridge have to leave, then it's not Cambridge anymore. And I got to thinking about that, and then I thought in conversation number 2 about Cheryl Ann, who's here in the audience today, about her imploring to us that we need, actually I don't know if it was imploring, I think it was more firing us up. She said, we need a housing movement. She said, that's the only way anything's gonna get done. We need a housing movement. And I thought, we have this question about, buildings and people, and we have this desire to have a housing movement. How do we do it? The terrain of this issue that we've been talking about is structural, it's systemic. We've been talking about, you can see this, did you guys all see this timeline over here? It describes, it's from the last housing conversation, and it describes, it basically lists all of the major housing policy of the 20th and 21st century at the federal, state, and local level, right? It's alphabet soup. That's what the housing field is, because there's so many different policy interventions that have been attempted over time. And over the course of the year, we've been tackling this terrain from all these different angles, like I said before. And when you think about a housing movement, when you think about, what Cambridge is, what a place is, it can get really overwhelming. And you start to ask yourself, how does knowing about the terrain of this systemic issue, this big issue that is not only national but global, and then felt very particularly here at home by our neighbors and our friends and our family and our community and ourselves, the question is, how does all of this help me and my community? And so I have one answer to that. Oops, I forgot something. I forgot my answer. Okay. Nope, that's not it either. Where's the... Needed that moment of silence earlier. Okay. How does this help me and my community? And that's the question that I posed to our 3 speakers about about what they're going to talk about today, is how can they help us? It's our final conversation. It's the end of this year where we've been exploring housing and home and affordable housing. And I want them to give us hope. And so before I introduce them, I'm going to just read a paragraph out of this insert from your program so you can follow along with me. This is from an essay about hope by Rebecca Solnit. It was published in The Guardian in July. She said, "Together we are very powerful, and we have a seldom told, seldom remembered history of victories and transformations that can give us confidence that, yes, we can change the world because we have many times before. You row forward looking back, and telling this history is part of helping people navigate towards the future. We need a litany, a rosary, a sutra, a mantra, a war chant of our victories. The past is set in daylight, and it can become a torch we can carry into the night that is the future." Okay, so now I have to introduce our wonderful speakers who are people that I've all admired for a long time, so I'm really excited to have them all here and talk to you. First, Caroline Cheong is an assistant professor in the University of Central Florida's History Department. Her research focuses on the relationship between urban heritage conservation, urban regeneration, and poverty reduction. She earned her PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in City and Regional Planning, and her MS is in Historic Preservation. Previously, Caroline was the Director of Research for Heritage Strategies International and Place Economics, where she focused on the economic impacts of historic preservation. Japonica Brown-Saracino, to her right, is an ethnographer who specializes in urban and community sociology, cultural sociology, and the study of race, ethnicity, and sexualities. She explores social preservation and gentrification in her book, A Neighborhood That Never Changes: Gentrification, Social Preservation, and the Search for Authenticity, which received the 2010-2011 Urban Affairs Association Best Book Award. In 2010, she published a second book, The Gentrification Debates, which is composed of excerpts from defining book chapters and articles on gentrification published over the last 45 years. Japonica was also the speaker at our first History Cafe of the year, so she sort of framed the beginning of our year together, and I'm excited to have her sort of come back and help us think through the end of our year. Adam Tanaka is a PhD candidate in urban planning at Harvard University, based this year at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, where he is writing his dissertation on large-scale middle-income housing in New York City. Previously, he was a visiting scholar at the NYU Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy and the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies dissertation fellow. He has also worked for a variety of New York City agencies on affordable housing, public finance, and land use issues. I'm really excited to have these three help us think tonight, and so I'll turn it over to Japonica. Thank you.
I think I can start with that. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this evening. There's been remarkable attention over the last several years to Jane Jacobs, and in a moment we will see Jane Jacobs. On the surface, this is because we've recently marked the 50-year anniversary of her game-changing book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and more recently, the 100th anniversary of her birth. I think there are several other reasons that we instinctively evoke Jacobs right now. First, because she presented portraits of mixed income and mixed use communities for which many of us, especially in places like Cambridge that have experienced rapid change over a few short decades, are nostalgic today. Here we see Jacobs, and here's her very famous book. Second, she, in combination with a person she famously battled, the New York City planner Robert Moses, is on our mind because I think some of us are beginning to rethink the model of local grassroots neighborhood-based response to urban change that Jacobs partially inspired and certainly embodies, and which has for the most part become our dominant approach to maintaining affordable housing. There's a certain revisiting and re-remembering of Moses. As much as many of us want to take on the man, especially when it comes to issues like affordable housing, I think that some of us are beginning to wonder if the project by project, block by block approach to urban advocacy that so many of us rely on today is working as well as it could. Maybe Moses, with his grand vision for remaking an entire city, was on to something. Today, I at least want to make a case for why our times require some of the spirit and scale of Moses, or perhaps, better put, the ambition of Moses, combined with the vision of diverse neighborhoods that Jacobs offers. There's ample evidence of how we're thinking about Jacobs and Moses today. Maybe some of you have encountered this. There have been exhibits on Jacobs and Moses, a new documentary on Jacobs, an opera on Jacobs and Moses. So it's not just me who's thinking about this. Yes. Yeah. So before I begin talking about what we can do about affordable housing and what this has to do with Jacobs and Moses, I want to address a third reason why I think we should be thinking about Jane Jacobs today, which is to try to unpack how her powerful vision of a diverse, eclectic neighborhood and the beautiful, evocative language she used to describe it continues to shape our sensibilities today. She picked up, but perhaps also extended, and helped many of us cultivate a taste for living in diverse places. And she made a powerful argument about how diversity is good for so many facets of urban life, from the safety of our streets to the vitality of our green spaces. But in so doing, she may have cultivated a taste for a certain kind of living that is, in the end, not entirely sustainable, especially at a late stage like what Cambridge is experiencing today. We all want to live in her Greenwich Village circa 1962, and those of us who have the resources to do so increasingly do so in unprecedented numbers. Tuesday night was a reminder of how some of us cluster in places like this, and I don't imagine that our current political climate and the closely related political map of the United States is going to do anything to slow the steady march of certain kinds of people into places like Cambridge and Boston and Brooklyn and San Francisco. If anything, I predict that our housing crisis, and it is a crisis, is about to become more serious. Which brings me back to why I want us to think a little bit more like Moses. Without broad-reaching urban planning policies in place, our collective seeking of residence in a particular kind of place means that someone has to go. By virtue of living in the places we desire, we alter them, making them into places that many of us ultimately do not desire, that look more like the contemporary village than the one in which Jacobs lived. After all, the candy shop that once occupied the first floor of Jane Jacobs' building was, for a period of recent years, a votive store called Glassy Baby, selling $40 glass votives. This was not her vision. So to further illustrate this point about how moving to places that we love can change them, we can turn to Jacobs' own The Death and Life of Great American Cities. Jacobs describes a family that purchased land for a weekend home, and before building a house on the land, loved to picnic on a grassy knoll. They chose that very spot to build their house because they enjoyed picnicking there. And Jacobs reports that they realized too late that they had destroyed and lost the knoll by, quote, supplanting it with themselves. There is a part of many of us, I believe, that is that family, naively enjoying the knoll without worrying about how our pleasure will alter it, and then too late, or almost too late, realizing that we have contributed to the displacement of our own vision of the places in which we live. So where does this desire to live on the knoll and to keep it as it was before we were there come from? And most importantly tonight, what do we do with it? I usually come to forums like this and offer hopeful notes from my book, A Neighborhood That Never Changes, which documents heterogeneity among gentrifiers. Specifically, it demonstrates the commitment that many gentrifiers, whom I term social preservationists, make to fighting for affordable housing and to taking other steps to preserve community character, which they associate with certain longtime residents. They do this because they are, in a sense, both subject and narrator of Jacobs' vignette. They are aware of how they themselves help to produce community change and of how their very presence threatens much of what they value about the places in which they seek residence. And these are not hollow sentiments. I can cite several individual, isolated neighborhood or town-specific victories that social preservationists have won, such as building artists or elder housing, nearly 200 units of affordable housing in a commercial development in Chicago's Uptown, preserved SRO buildings in Chicago, the adoption in Provincetown of the Community Preservation Act, instances in which a historic preservation district loosened restrictions to keep a lifetime resident in her home. So this works some of the time. But I can also count many losses. An SRO for mentally ill residents turned into condos. A neighborhood shop owned by an Iranian couple that sold groceries that became the neighborhood's fourth high-end frame shop after they were priced out. An artist on his moving day leaving town forever. Which is why a week and a half ago when I began thinking about this talk, I wanted to come in and suggest that when it comes to affordable housing, we need more Moses and a little less Jacobs. Maybe instead of fighting battle after battle, project after project, we need a comprehensive national affordable housing plan, a set of protective policies that are automatically triggered the moment that upscaling begins. Now, why do I want to argue for this? First, because I think we're often doing too little too late. We create affordable housing when too many residents have already left. I'm glad that we're gathering tonight, and I think we have to gather to talk about these issues and to plan actions. But I also think that more should have happened in many places decades ago. Short of a major shift in the economy, it's challenging for me to imagine how we bring back the scores of people who have already been displaced in places like Cambridge and increasingly throughout the Boston metro area. Another reason for thinking more on the scale of Moses is that there's a danger in thinking too locally. One reason for this is because research demonstrates again and again that gentrification is contagious. It moves from neighborhood to neighborhood and from city to city. So we can't just be thinking about our own individual blocks or even our individual neighborhoods or cities. Instead, we need to think proactively, for instance, about the pressure that changes in Boston and Cambridge place on Malden and Providence and Portland, and so on. A recent newspaper article suggests that Sacramento, for instance, has the fastest growing rents in the nation. Between 2015 and 2016, rents in Sacramento increased by 10% in a single year. And of course, incomes aren't keeping pace. What is happening in Sacramento is, of course, totally related to what's happening in the Bay Area, nearly 2 hours away. And that means that at the very least, we need regional plans, if not national plans. And that, to go back to my previous point, these need to be in place or triggered at the earliest sign of upscaling, before rents increase by 10% in a single year. So what might a national affordable housing plan look like? Matt Desmond, in his wonderful new book, Evicted, offers several suggestions, and I'll adapt them here. He suggests blanket national affordable housing vouchers for anyone below a certain income threshold. He also recommends federal caps on annual rent increases, keeping these to inflation rates. Moving money reserved for federal subsidies for homeowners in the form of income tax write-offs for mortgage interest to fund programs that provide affordable or public housing or that reward landlords for keeping units affordable. In short, we must move away from a neoliberal approach to the city, which has flourished at the national level for the last several decades, and which lets the market drive our urban policy and planning. Market solutions have not addressed the rising tide of urban inequality within and across our cities that is the dominant reality in the contemporary urban US. I would like to go on here elaborating on visions for national housing policy, but I can't say that at this moment, in this month, in this year, I'm particularly optimistic about national level affordable housing policy, or even about the ease with which we can develop affordable housing plans that will cross state lines. So given what happened last Tuesday, I want to offer two contradictory recommendations. On the one hand, I want us to try to forget Tuesday and begin building a framework in our cities and in our states for robust national affordable housing policy along the lines of the recommendations that Desmond offers. We need to urgently rethink housing altogether. As Madden and Marcuse recently wrote, there's a conflict between housing as a lived social space and housing as an instrument for profit-making, a conflict between housing as home and as real estate. Imagine a world in which we do not seek profit from housing other human beings. Short of that, imagine a world in which we manage housing markets so that no one is spending more than a third of their income on housing costs. But I also want us to recognize that it may be a while before these dreams are realized on the national stage, in which case I want us to take some inspiration from Jacobs and from the many individuals I've studied and from their protests and advocacy. I do believe we can make a difference step by step, project by project, from seizing opportunities in front of us. But we can also, to the best of our ability, make concrete, comprehensive city-level and ideally regional and state-level housing policies that protect affordability. Michelle Wu, president of the Boston City Council, recently wrote that in this political moment, it is cities that will be responsible for ensuring the American dream. She writes, "It is now more important than ever for cities to lead." And I think she is absolutely right. But I think we want to go a step beyond this and use our cities as incubators for broader social policies that will protect affordability, that hopefully down the line can be applied at the national level. So what do we do at the city level right now? I think that there are several good ideas that we can adopt from New York City's new affordable housing plan, and I think we can push beyond that too. Before I tell you what I want us to do, I'm going to say a couple things that I don't think we should do. I don't want us to adopt an ad hoc approach. I don't want us to just go vacant lot by vacant lot or upscale development by upscale development. We need a comprehensive plan. It also can't just be about building new construction. It's just too expensive right now. I don't think we can depend on that. It also has to be about the preservation of existing public housing and affordable units and the conversion of existing housing units into affordable units. I think when we do use public land and we develop it to create affordable housing. I believe that all new developments should be mixed income, and truly so, not a small portion set aside for affordability, but truly mixed income developments. Developers should not be able to opt out of building affordable units by contributing to an affordable housing fund. Let's get the units into buildings now. I think we have to pair thinking and planning about climate change and affordable housing simultaneously. Building, for instance, on the waterfront in the name of affordability strikes me as incredibly short-sighted. We want to think about making cities sustainable and affordable going forward for the long haul. This should be long-term planning that we're doing. We should protect tenants from landlord harassment by creating law enforcement task forces that focus on this issue as modeled by New York City, so we can keep people in affordable units. We could create special lending programs for the construction of affordable housing. We can develop methods for preventing rentals from going condo, like offering small grants and loans for existing landlords to be able to keep renting. Of course, this has to be coupled with something like rent control, at least for those who choose to participate in these programs. This is a way to ensure that there's high-quality, affordable housing. And speaking of rent control, I think it's something that we need to revisit. Is it a coincidence that gentrification has become ascendant in the Boston metro area since voters defeated rent control in 1994? Compared to other northeastern cities like New York, Boston had been slow to gentrify until the late 1990s, early 2000s. I don't believe that this is the whole story, but I suspect that it's part of it. When buildings go condo, we can also offer incentives in the form of tax relief or even stipends for keeping some units in the rental market permanently and/or for selling below market to low-income buyers. Here, I'm outlining a modestly different approach to housing compared to my dream at the national level, one that doesn't put profit at the forefront and one that requires substantial investment of public funds. Now, why should we do all of this? In part, I hope, because we want to be responsible citizens who look out for those of a variety of means. But I think many of us will also want to do this for selfish reasons, either because we want to stay in place or because we want a working local economy, and that requires people who can do all kinds of work. And finally, because many of us move to cities because we desire density and heterogeneity and anonymity. And when cities become very, very expensive, much of this is threatened. And because, like Jacobs, many of us, including many I have studied, are enchanted by eclectic, mixed-income places. We want to live on that grassy knoll that Jacobs describes and to keep the grassy knoll as it was before we got there. To do so is, of course, impossible, but we can come closer to that vision if we plan and plan and plan some more. And this planning ultimately, as I hope I've suggested, means comprehensive national level change. And by all means, we ought to begin working towards this. But in the meantime, I don't want us to assume that the only immediate alternative is, as Jacobs proposed in a 2004 interview, to build low-cost housing in small lots and see that it's kept affordable. Sure, we should do that, but we have to think bolder and bigger at the city, metro, state, and regional levels. Now, I think, before it's too late for some of the places that we love. Thank you.
Oh, you hear me? Is it good?
You can just push the side
Okay.
arrow key, the right
Okay.
arrow key to go to the next slide.
Okay, great. Can everybody hear me back there? Okay. How about now? Okay. All right. If you can't hear me at any point, just raise your hand in the back, and I'll try to speak up or get closer to the microphone. Thank you, Japonica, for that incredibly enriching discussion about affordable housing and the challenges that we're facing today, especially in Cambridge and cities like Cambridge that are growing so quickly. I first want to say, or to congratulate the Cambridge Historical Society too, for really pushing the envelope in terms of the role of humanities and the way that we think about the role of history in shaping the future. I can say that, as somebody who has been practicing and studying historic preservation for quite some time, that the innovative way that you were thinking about this is really pushing the envelope in a really good way. So I congratulate you on that. And I know many other people do as well. We need more organizations that are thinking about things in this way. So the starting point of this conversation between Jane Jacobs and Robert Moses is actually, I want to pick up on that a little bit, because within preservation, that really is sort of the starting point for the field of preservation. As many of you know, it started out as sort of with this sort of advocacy bend between this great battle between Jane Jacobs and Robert Moses. And for quite some time, as preservation as a field matured, it really was based in advocacy. And it really was sort of this polarized duality, this fight between preservation and development, preservation and modernity. And that has tended to be how a lot of people think of preservation now. And often how preservationists themselves think of themselves when thinking about their own sort of self-identity. What I would like to do today is challenge that self-identity a little bit and encourage you to rethink who you are in terms of members of a historical society and what your role is in shaping the future. And for those of you who do think of yourselves as preservationists, to sort of challenge your self-identity as a preservationist as well. In reality, what I have found is that there are actually, despite this sort of long historical argument between preservation and development, there are actually a lot of opportunities for overlap, or for them to work in tandem rather than in opposition, particularly when it comes to affordable housing. So at the global level, if we scale up, there have been recent conversations even at the UN level. There was a recent conference that some of you may have heard of in Quito in UN Habitat. Habitat 3 had a conference when they actually, for the first time, institutionalized the role of heritage and the role of culture in developing and creating sustainable and healthy cities. Now, if any of you are familiar with, how large NGOs work, it seems like something to many of us it would be obvious, but I will say, for a large housing NGO, it was something that is very forward, and we were all very happy about that. Now, what that means is that it has given agency and sort of given a purpose to the role of history in creating healthy, sustainable cities, which is code for development. So, what that means then is it sort of opened the door for preservation and development to come together in a more sort of cohesive way, rather than in being in opposition at the global or at the truly global level. And it does so, I think, in two ways, principally. The first one being form. And to bring this back down to a sort of more local level, in that great book, The Life and Death of American Cities, one of the things that Jane Jacobs talks about is the value and the importance of scale. In historic neighborhoods like Cambridge and in Philadelphia, where I've spent a number of years, all up and down the East Coast and around the world, really, all historic neighborhoods have a certain number of things in common with regard to form. They all tend to be low scale. They all tend to have a variegated urban typological form in terms of architectural style. And because of this low-rise nature, it lends itself to the creation and the incubation of small to medium businesses, which, as some of you know, tend to be the real drivers of local economies. There are larger amounts of capital that are retained within the community within smaller and local businesses, which is part of the reason we've seen such a huge push for go local within the last decade. That's just one economic reason. There's also this sort of low-scale environment that leads to increased social opportunities and social interaction and diversity of interaction between people. of different social classes and different ethnicities, which is something that we might need more and more in in up and coming years or decades even. And then also within this sort of context of scale, a lot of historic neighborhoods are sort of characterized by really local or important public spaces and plazas. And these plazas and public spaces are spaces of communication. They're gathering places for socializing, political demonstrations, or identity. So not only do they serve this sort of real tactical, physical place of communion, they also have they're also really significant contributors to identity, which is, I think, the second contributor for historic neighborhoods, is the fact that historic neighborhoods in their totality really contribute to the creation of communal identity. There is a shared culture, a shared history, and it creates something that we are talking about called social capital. Now, this does sort of, on the flip side of that, lead into a lot of the topics that Japonica was talking about in terms of gentrification and displacement. There are, as often happens, two sides to this coin, and one of the arguments in terms of the positives of preservation and the gentrification argument is that the social capital that is created within a historic neighborhood and an incoming populations actually increases by having increased communication and interaction and a shared identity within that historic fabric. Now, that may be a new identity, but it is one that is created by the incoming and the existing populations themselves. And the way that this happens, there are a bunch of other sort of community building tools to encourage this that we can possibly go into in the Q&A later. But the second point that I wanted to make was that figuring out how to bridge this gap between preservation and development, especially within the realm of affordable housing, requires us together to think a little bit differently about how our historic properties function and see them for what they really are at their core, which is real estate assets. And that might be a very uncomfortable word for people who are used to thinking of historic buildings in purely architectural terms. But at the end of the day, this battle between preservation and development exists because historic buildings are real estate assets. And if we can begin to understand what that means and speak or at least understand what that means, then we are worlds ahead in terms of bridging that gap between preservation and development. And not having this sort of duality or this oppositional relationship between preservation and modernity. So with that, I wanted to show just some examples of when preservation and affordable housing have been combined. The first one, which button am I supposed to press?
Right one.
Okay.
Should be that. And it's not. Not sure what. Fun.
Technical difficulties.
A little bit. Hold on. I don't know why it's not.
Okay. So this is actually an example of,
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Good?
No. Keep going.
Which way? Right or left?
that one, there we go.
There.
So this is a recent project actually in Philadelphia that is, if any of you have been following kind of the school district debacle in Philadelphia, it has been quite a mess with the closure of a number of schools. And beyond issues of education reform, it leads to a very serious problem of a glut of very large vacant buildings, many of which exist in already economically depressed areas. So the city of Philadelphia is sort of stuck with this conundrum of what do we do with all of these buildings. This building in particular has been vacant for about 40 years. And so it's what we call a white elephant building, meaning that it is just kind of sitting there in the middle of a neighborhood being vacant for quite some time. Nobody knows what to do with it. And it has become sort of an eyesore. So recently, what the city of Philadelphia decided to do with it is sold it to a developer who, with sort of fancy financing and agreements with the city, adaptively reused this building to convert it into 12 apartment homes for homeless veterans. So this is an example of the kinds of partnerships that are required between the private sector and the public sector to create projects that combine historic fabric with the needs of affordable housing within the community. And these veterans were all very local to that neighborhood, or had been sort of fixtures of that neighborhood for quite some time. Now, in addition to this, there are social programs that are part of this agreement in terms of services that are going to be offered within the neighborhood itself or the building to these homeless veterans. A second example is in Charleston. In Habitat for Humanity, in and of itself, has initiated a number of projects over the last, I think, 10 to 15 years that really have fulfilled their primary goal of providing affordable housing, but in the meantime, they have also been creating affordable housing through existing fabric, not just creating new fabric. And it wasn't until somebody said, hey, Habitat for Humanity, you're actually doing historic preservation, that the bells kind of went off for them and said, wait a minute, we are. And it kind of shifted their focus. And again, going with what I began with, reimagined their own identities as preservationists. They may first identify with the affordable housing needs, but at the parallel levels, they're also practicing preservation. So this was in Charleston, where they used the architectural forms of traditional Charleston homes to actually create affordable housing for the local communities there. And as you can see, they did so in such a way that this affordable housing doesn't necessarily stand out as what you might see for many of us if we walk around and say, oh, that's, if obviously Section 8 housing or other kinds of low-income housing. And what they did, in doing so, they sort of sent a message, and they normalized affordable housing within the preservation context and within the local community themselves, right there. So, there's not only a message there through form and structure, but also the sort of social message of normalizing affordable housing and the people who live in affordable housing as well. There's a third example that I don't have a picture for, but there's a development group that's based in New York, but they've done work all over the Eastern Seaboard called Common Ground. They're an affordable housing development corporation, but a large number of their projects actually focus on white elephant buildings like the one that I just showed you in Philadelphia, and smaller scale neighborhood buildings that really do, through the combination of tax credits and other kinds of financial incentives, allow them to be developers and fulfill their obligations of getting a return on their investment, but also fulfill the social goals of providing affordable housing and preservation and historic preservation by putting an underused and underutilized asset back onto the market. Now, similar to what they did in Philadelphia, most of the Common Ground projects as well have instituted public services or social services within their ground floor buildings so that these low-income residents, many of whom are recovering drug addicts or veterans, have access to services and are obligated to sort of check in with them every once in a while and make sure that they're still on their feet and that their services are easily accessed. So it's this combination of not just providing housing, but also the services to go along with it, with the historic building acting as sort of an incubator for those services. And then the last example that I want to show is, it's an example that's sort of far flung from here, but it's one that I know very well, and it's in Quito, in Ecuador. This was in Quito in 1990. And this was it's a 1976 first World Heritage City ever recognized by UNESCO. And it's an incredibly beautiful Spanish colonial downtown. In 1990, it had basically become slumified. This is what you would see walking into the historic center, which was an informal market. Sanitation issues were rampant, crime, prostitution, drugs, anything you can think of, it was there. So what they did through a project with the Inter-American Development Bank and engaging the local communities there, is they transformed it into this. And beyond just the physical differences, what that meant is that some of these informal merchants had to leave, but they did so through a program where they were where they attempted to bring some of that market with them. So the financial repercussions weren't as bad as they might have been otherwise. There was also a lot of financial incentives that went with it in order to provide economic incentives for the residents who lived there so that they could stay for as long as they possibly could. So, that's just one example, or a few examples of how historic preservation and affordable housing can actually work together. I want to close with emphasizing, even though my last example was very international and very global, that all of these changes happen at the local level. The affordable housing issues facing Cambridge and whatever city that you're living in, the partnerships that are created between the affordable housing and preservation, that changing of the mindset has to happen at the very local level. And so I want to encourage all of us to be uncomfortable and to, as strange as it sounds, try to be comfortable in that discomfort when we try to sort of reimagine how we think about our historic built environment. And challenge how we understand our historic fabrics to meet our current needs and so that we can meet the needs of the future. Thank you.
So as I mentioned before, my study of Co-op City is part of this bigger study for my dissertation about other, these kind of large-scale middle-income housing projects, and what can we learn from them for today? Because what's interesting is while even in New York, and New York has quite a successful public housing stock, even in New York there's this feeling that large-scale public housing has failed, that it has not delivered on its promises of creating successful communities. At the same time, there's a huge nostalgia in New York for these middle-income projects, especially projects like Stuyvesant Town, which have been facing struggles with rent deregulation and this kind of thing. So I basically wanted to explore how are these places built, and more importantly, how is the private sector involved in advocating for these places, or kind of third sector, civic sector groups like the groups that built Co-op City? Ooh. Sorry, I do not know what's going on here.
Should just be able
I have to go like this?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Oh, I see. Okay. So first of all, let me just describe to you what a limited equity cooperative is, and contrast it to conventional home ownership. So when you typically purchase a home, you'll put down a down payment representing some share of the equity in the home, and then you get a mortgage, and as you pay off the mortgage, the principal, your equity increases until you own a larger share of the home, and then you can sell it on the market, maybe at a greater price than you paid for it, because of appreciation in property values. In a nonprofit cooperative, it's a very different model. So this is a diagram of Co-op City. You can imagine each of those little houses is an apartment, and there are another 15,000 plus of those. And the residents, when they move in, they purchase shares in a corporation. The corporation as a whole owns Co-op City, and then shareholders have use rights to their apartment. And in the rent every month, or the carrying charge as they're known in a cooperative, they are paying down not just the operating expenses and the property taxes, but they're also paying off the underlying mortgage of the property. But the difference is that as the mortgage decreases, the underlying appreciation is capped. So there's the equity. Today it's about $25,000 a unit to purchase a home. That's not a down payment, that is the full purchase price. The debt on the property. And then there's a gap between the market value of the development and then this limited resale value, which is essentially what you paid when you moved in, plus whatever share of that underlying mortgage you paid off by the time you leave. And so that gap is what enables this long-term affordability. And you could think of it almost as a halfway house between renting and owning. So you get some of the benefits of ownership, the mortgage interest deductions that we mentioned before, as well as a vote in the management of the property and any decisions about refinancing or changes in the property management. But it's also low cost and affordable. How affordable actually is it? So I'm going to use an example of an apartment there in one of these triple core buildings. It's about 1,100 square feet, 2 bedrooms, sorry. And the full purchase price is $22,000 with a monthly rent of $1,000. And Co-op City was built through a government program called Mitchell-Lama that New Yorkers are very familiar with, because pretty much whenever you walk around New York City and see a building that looks maybe like public housing, but it has balconies, that's probably Mitchell-Lama. So Mitchell-Lama was created to be this middle-income housing program, and so you do have income thresholds, not just a maximum, but also a minimum for the development. So how is affordability achieved in Co-op City? And in my research, I've identified 5 factors that enabled this affordability. The first was low land cost. So Co-op City was actually built on kind of a swampy area, purchased for a very low price. Then there was some landfill that took place. It was actually also a theme park, but that's another story. But many other of these affordable cooperative projects were built on cleared land. In fact, Penn South, the project that JFK attended the groundbreaking of, or dedication of rather, is right next door to Chelsea and not so far from the West Village that Jane Jacobs lived in and Jake Jacobs wrote about. And Penn South displaced a tenement neighborhood, a kind of mixed-use neighborhood, in order to provide new affordable housing. And the developers of Co-op City, these kind of labor union builders, were very critical of Jane Jacobs' arguments, and we can go into more detail about that during the discussion if you wish. Then the developments received property tax abatements, so reduced real estate taxes. They had cheap mortgage loans. The builders were non-profit, so they took no profit essentially on the construction. And then the operation of the project, as was mentioned in the film, there's no profit there, there's no investor. So whatever excess is produced through the operations goes back into a general fund or is actually rebated to residents. And finally, the scale of the projects facilitated economies in terms of construction, operation, utilities, and other aspects of the project. So you might say that Co-op City seems really far away, a New York solution, something that doesn't exist anywhere else. And certainly in its appearance, it can seem kind of a massive New York City story. But there is a place in Cambridge, actually, that has a fairly similar history. And it's called Harwell Homes. Does anyone know where Harwell Homes is? So it's in central Cambridge. And it's, despite looking very different, is something of a similar story, actually. It's essentially an urban renewal area that was identified by the city in the early 60s, and then a local nonprofit bid on the site to create a low-cost cooperative. And there was actually a short-lived federal program called Section 236 that gave cheap mortgage financing for this project. And you can see that physically, actually, the project is quite different to the rest of Cambridge. It is a planned community with shared open spaces, different kinds of semi-detached houses, some row houses. There's this kind of private pedestrian walkway that goes through the middle, so there is an attempt to create this sense of community spatially as well as through the ownership. And like Co-op City, about 5 years ago, Harwell Homes had paid off its mortgage and actually was eligible to go market rate if it wished. And then the residents would have been able to sell their homes probably at 10, 15, 20 times the value. Instead, the residents voted to maintain affordability, refinance, and actually get Section 8 vouchers from the federal government to enable the lower income residents who were there to keep on having low monthly charges. So Harwell Home remains, it's about 56 apartments. It remains a kind of a co-op city in Cambridge and a model of this kind of cooperative living. And just going back to this list here, you can see some of the ways in which Harwell Homes also used the same model of low land cost through urban renewal. Actually, it was an industrial site, not homes, so that I don't think there were any people displaced. cheap money with a federally subsidized mortgage, non-profit ownership, and some economies of scale as well. And I think looking at these numbers, this list again, we can see what some of the constraints are right now in terms of achieving this kind of affordable housing again. So there is no cheap land really in Cambridge left. There certainly isn't urban renewal anymore. In terms of cheap money, cooperatives are really seen by banks as something non-financeable. They do not like lending to cooperatives because of the unusual share structure and just because it's kind of an unknown type of ownership in the US. In Scandinavia, where there's a very big cooperative sector, commercial banks lend to cooperatives as a matter of course. That doesn't happen in the US. And finally, in terms of this non-profit question, the builders of Co-op City were this huge kind of civic sector development group that built over 30,000 apartments over the course of 20 years. That's more than the entire housing stock of Somerville. And it was really a robust kind of third sector group that did work with government to get low-cost mortgages and the rest of it, but it was a group that was there to advocate for the needs of people who could not afford private housing. And it was linked to unions, but also somewhat independent. The people who moved in did not have to be union members. So I think in terms of thinking about the housing movement, these are some of the lessons that could be learned from history to think about who are the stakeholders in the city now, who are the people who could group together and encourage the development of some kind of non-profit developer that would be building at scale and that would be able to demonstrate to the public sector that they were capable of doing this kind of work effectively. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, speakers. Oh no, I forgot all about that. Thank you, speakers. I felt like those three talks really, they went really nicely together. Thank you very much. And around the same time as the stories you were telling about Co-op City, the Cambridge Chronicle published a story that began, "When is a high-rise not a high-rise? When the community plans it." And it was about 808 Memorial Drive, which was at that time under discussion. This idea that a high-rise, when we say the word high-rise, we mean something other than simply a very tall building. That is something that I think all three of you brought to the conversation in very different ways. And the question of not only affordability and policy, but also form was sort of a thread through all of your form and scale, both in building and in ambition. So I really appreciated that, and it brought to mind that story. There's a lot of really great material about the development of 808 Memorial Drive at the Cambridge Public Library. I really encourage you to go take a look at some of that. Some of you might have seen that on display at the last conversations. Okay, so I want to invite you all to turn to your neighbor, the person that you're sitting next to, the person that you came with. And I have a couple of things to suggest that you might talk about. You can introduce yourselves, say your name. You can tell each other something that surprised you that you heard. You could tell each other something that you're not sure about, that you'd like to ask, or that you're curious about. The other thing that we're going to do this evening is we're going to pass out, kind of like we do at history cafes, as I described earlier, we're going to pass out a card that really gets at, we talked about stories and storytelling and that's what historians do, and any good story has stakes. Stories have characters and stories have stakes, and hey, we are all characters in the story of Cambridge, and there are stakes for each of us and for the city at large in the story of affordable housing as the city changes. And these questions that we're going to hand out are really about stakes for ourselves and how we view ourselves as characters and actors in the story of Cambridge. So this card has two questions. The first is, Cambridge cannot afford to lose. And each of you might have a different idea about what Cambridge can't afford to lose. And we want to invite each of you to say what you personally think your Cambridge can't afford to lose. Those are the stakes. And then in response to that, you're also going to say, to improve the housing situation in Cambridge, I can, will, plan to, already do, blank. And so this is about a collective commitment to the social contract that you all were talking about this evening, rhetorically, politically, socially, that we're all making to each other and to this issue. So, turn to your neighbor. What surprised you? What questions do you have? What can't Cambridge afford to lose? And we'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll do some Q&A with the speakers before we end. We're going to start our Q&A. We invite you afterwards to go to the back and have some more snacks and continue the conversation. I love hearing a room full of talking, but we want to make sure that we keep to our schedule. So, has anyone asked a question? Yes, I agree. I agree, yes. My priority is that you personally do the thing that's most useful to you. So if you really want to ask a question, focus on that, and if you really want to put the thing on the back, do that. That's the best answer I can give there.
Okay, can you hear me? Is this on? No. Well, it says it's on. No? Okay, I'll come up here. Okay, this gentleman's first question. Okay, this gentleman's first question is, what does the panel think about adding the right to housing to the Massachusetts Constitution?
You want to take it?
I mean, to be honest, this isn't something I've thought about before this very moment, but this is the kind of rather bold action that I'm suggesting we need to take. But I think we should not take it without also thinking about a number of multi-layered policies that would be put in place to support a right to housing for all people so that we can actually provide housing. And what kind of housing are we providing and how are we doing it?
Just really quickly, I would just, piggyback on that and say that whatever kind of policy needs to be sort of, incredibly well thought out, so that we don't get into a situation where we're putting the cart before the horse and we just sort of have a policy and have no idea how to implement it, which I think has happened a lot before.
So this is not an issue I've studied in depth, but New York State's constitution does actually enshrine something of a right to housing. And it's had a lot of unintended consequences, especially as relates to homeless policy and homelessness prevention. Some not so good, in fact, in terms of kind of Band-Aid approaches to solving the housing crisis. The other thing is, since 1949, the United States has had a goal of, decent housing for every American family. And that's a very, very long way off. So I'm not sure how much these kinds of, legal instruments or legal goals can get us somewhere without changes in the economy, improved wages, and reducing that disconnect between housing cost and income in the places where people want to live.
Okay, his second question, and then I'll get to. The second question is, what does the panel think about the 200,000 units that MAPC thinks the Eastern Massachusetts will need in the next 30 years?
Anybody want to field that? Metro Boston planning question? Anyone?
Again, I'm not an expert in the Massachusetts context, but the politics of development in suburban areas is going to be a huge issue for that. And even though there are instruments like 40D that already exist, which enable developers to kind of override zoning and build affordable housing, communities have less than 10% of their housing stock as deed-restricted affordable housing. That is a kind of optional program, so it hasn't been used everywhere. And given the fragmentation of the Boston metro area politically, jurisdictionally, that to me seems like a big challenge, especially since the denser parts of the city are built out. And so waiving some of those kind of lot size regulations, home size coverage regulations, height regulations, those kinds of things, it's going to be essential. I mean, to me, as someone who studies New York, I'm always amazed by how, in New York you do have really one city that encompasses an area that in Boston is like 100 cities. And even New York struggles with these issues of community resistance. So not to say that, every neighborhood should change and it should be some kind of override from the outside or from above. It needs to be, a back and forth, but that to me seems like one of the big problems, not having studied in depth MAPC's plan.
I would just add that I agree that the denser parts of the metro area are built out, but we also have to think about how we're using existing housing units and how much space we each will have within, what kind of housing we will live in. Can we have, two people living in a 2-bedroom apartment anymore? Do we need to rethink sort of radically how much space we all need? And maybe even more on the scale of how many people in New York City live, for instance.
And the last thing I would add to is just to re-emphasize, the importance of utilizing the housing stock that already does exist. I don't know what the vacancy levels are in the Boston area, but if there are vacancy levels, I think that should be sort of the first targeted area. And then also, secondly, to what Adam was saying, there's a sort of second layer to this that a lot of recent research has come out saying that poverty levels in suburban areas are actually higher than they are in a lot of urban areas too. So that's something that needs to also be looked at, I think, as part and parcel of this discussion in terms of place-based affordable housing.
Have we mentioned already that conversation number 1 and number 2 and this were all recorded by CCTV? Did we mention that already? Okay, because there was discussion of metro housing development in the first and second conversations, and if you want to go back to that, I encourage you to do so, and also look up the resources that we have listed in the conversation guide, because there's a lot of really meaty stuff on this topic.
Okay. Yes. Can you just tell me your question? So I have somebody else.
Okay. Is the protocol that it needs to be written down instead of that I use a microphone?
No. In the protocol, so you tell me and I say it, so that we can make sure that there are questions.
Can you give a question?
Yeah. If you have a real just plain question, you can ask it.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question is about limited equity, because lots of people in Cambridge have been wanting that middle ground, more of it, limited equity co-ops. The city has leaned towards limited equity condos because of the loan problem that you described. But I'm intrigued that both Co-op City and Harwell Homes did refinance relatively recently. So I'm interested to hear why that worked for them, and what if the city created its own fund that got around the problems with the banks, so that would be something that we could consider here. And lastly, just to mention that you showed newly built limited equity, but we also have limited equity in already existing buildings.
Quickly on the very last point, there is an existing stock of formerly rent-controlled housing that converted to limited equity co-op in the late 1980s, early 1990s. It was quite an ambitious plan initially when the city council amended its conversion laws to enable this. They wanted to have about 100, they had to target about 100 apartments that would be converted to limited equity cooperatives, and I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it is something like 25 or 30 apartments. It's a very small percentage of the Cambridge stock. and that was mostly because landlords felt that they could just keep them as rental properties. They didn't feel a need to sell to the tenants financially, but the incentives were in place. In terms of the financing issue, I'm not familiar actually with the terms of Harwell Homes' recent refinancing. I know that in New York, in the co-op city context, it was a very, very complicated deal that actually involved HUD, Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, insuring the cooperative's mortgage, and the state and the city as well. And that actually it involved HUD amending some of its rules on lending to enable co-ops to be eligible, because actually co-ops are not eligible under that program. So they made a kind of one-time change. Although it actually led to a lot of resentment at Co-op City because HUD's regulations are very strict. So for instance, they had to make all these changes to fire code, change the flooring, change some of the entryways. It was actually very expensive to qualify for the mortgage per HUD's terms. In terms of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the difference between affordable condominium and affordable cooperative, affordable condominiums on some level are not so different from the affordable cooperative model. What is different is the nature of ownership and governance, and the other thing that is different is the appreciation index. So federal programs that incentivize affordable condominiums have different ways of kind of permitting appreciation, and I'm not an expert on that, but it's more tracked to inflation. While limited equity cooperatives really have this much stricter, typically, model of preventing profit on the resale. And that actually brings me to one of the tensions in the limited equity cooperative model, which is essentially this tension between wealth building, or permitting some kind of asset building, which after all is, in our society, one of the functions of housing, and then this kind of creation of long-term affordability for future residents. And what some advocates of affordable condominiums say is that it's a better middle ground that permits some wealth buildup, but it also still means that upon resale, the property is still somewhat below market. While in the cooperative instance, there have been assertions that it's kind of discrimination, right? Saying, like, my home, I'm going to make money, your home, you're not, because of the next person to move in. And these have been some of the really interesting debates that have been happening, again, in the New York City context, I'm most familiar about the conversion of some of these cooperatives to market rates and the privatization of these cooperatives. And some people saying, look, if I'm able to sell this home on the market, that's my kid going to college, that's my retirement. Otherwise, I'm stuck here. And for many people, even if they do sell, the money that they get back on selling the limited equity is so little that often they're not able to move anywhere else in the area. They're priced out of their own city or out of their own, part of the city. So that's actually part of the reason you have very, very low turnover in these cooperatives, which is again a strength. It really creates a very solid community, an engaged community, but in some sense also creates challenges for people who want to access that affordable housing. So that was a very long answer, sir.
Okay, this is going to be the last question, and it's to Adam. Could the city of Cambridge be instrumental in creating large-scale cooperative middle-income housing, and how?
Maybe the quickest thing I would say is landfilling the Charles River and building co-op there. No, I mean, the thing is, the creation of housing at the time that these projects were being built was relative to wages quite cheap, So these projects didn't require extensive subsidy on the land, typically. They didn't require operating subsidy beyond a tax abatement that was modest at the beginning. But then as inflation increased and wages stagnated, the economic calculus just kind of collapsed. And then as land got really expensive and existing rental stock became expensive, it just became harder to convert. So there is this story of the rent-controlled units converting to limited equity cooperatives when they weren't so expensive, actually, in the grand scheme of things. Same in New York City, actually, when New York City had its fiscal crisis and there was a huge amount of vacant housing stock. Some of those apartment buildings were converted into limited equity cooperatives because the upfront cost was just pretty low. And that's what created that kind of permanent, that that upfront affordability. But I would say the biggest challenge is changing mindsets about what housing is. That it can be something other than a commodity, and that can be aspirational. And something that I find really inspiring about my work with Co-op City residents is that they see Co-op City as a very aspirational place to be. That it is ownership. It's an unusual form of ownership, but it is ownership. They vote for their board, they make collective decisions about how the property is managed, and they're shareholders, and they can, there are rules about how they can pass their apartment on to their children. It's complicated rules regulated by the state, but that it's more than just this kind of like poor man's ownership. It is a different kind of ownership, and I think to me that is the biggest challenge. Then the other challenge is economic. So next time there's a downturn in the Cambridge real estate market, let's try to convert everything to co-op, limited equity.
All right, thanks everybody. Here's Marieke.
Thanks, everyone. Just a hand for our speakers, Anna, Tanaka, and Diana. Wow. Thank you so much. This has been such an amazing series, and we're very proud to be a part of it. Thank you for bringing your thoughtfulness and your own individual voices to this conversation. If you think that we, like Caroline said, are doing innovative work around humanities here in Cambridge, I hope you'll consider supporting us. The cards that were passed out, where you wrote down your answers, we're posting them at the back. So if you could please pass those back to Lynn or Rosemary Arena there at the back of the room, would be much appreciated. We are keeping these for the historical record. This is so important that your voice is heard. Everything that we have this year, everything we've collected is going up to the city. Who here has been to anything that Envision Cambridge has done? Yeah, not a lot of us, but this is another way that your voice can be heard by the city for the future. I want to thank again our sponsors. I want to thank all of you for coming. For every successful event that lasts 2 hours, there's 500 hours of planning and emails that come in at 2 a.m. And the one person that I really, really want to thank tonight is Lynn Waskella. She's in the back. Please thank her for all of her hard work. Literally could not done this without Lynn and so many of you. So if anybody wants to continue this conversation at the field, I still plan to go. I hope to see you there. Look for me. And thank you so much. Thank you.